They said the stench reached beyond the hills. Not the scent of death, but of something waiting to die. The fields were not empty. They were filled with stakes, some rotted, some fresh, some still twitching, and every stake pointed upward, like fingers accusing heaven. They didn't build crosses in his land. They built warnings. A rider once approached a forest of impaled men and turned back without a word. He was never seen again, but his horse returned 3 days later, soaked in blood, ribs cracked open from fare. No empire dared call it war. No priest dared call it heresy. It was something else, not rebellion, not cruelty, not madness. It was control, carved into bodies, raised into the wind. He didn't just kill. He designed suffering like a sculptor. And the screams, they weren't loud. That was the worst part. They were soft, rhythmic, like prayer. Children stopped laughing in towns that smelled the wind from the east. No one knew when he would strike, only that when he did, you wouldn't be remembered by name, only by how you died and how long your body swayed. Not even the crows came near, not even the worms fed. He was not born Vlad the Impaler. He was born the second son, forgotten in the shadow of thrones and oaths. The castle where he first opened his eyes smelled of mold and steel, a damp fortress carved into the Carpathian earth. His father called himself Dragon. But the boy learned early that titles were masks and masks slip. When the Sultan took him hostage, they didn't break him. They taught him how to look at a man and find his weakness before he ever spoke. They taught him how pain was not punishment, but persuasion. When he returned, he did not come back as a son. He came back as something else. His face no longer wore youth. His gaze held no curiosity. He spoke little, and when he did, even allies flinched. They say he once left a golden cup at a well untouched for years, because fear did what no guard could. His laws were not written in ink, but in screams. His justice was swift, but never blind. And when he impaled, it wasn't rage, it was ritual. Vlad did not howl. He calculated. He measured the height of the stake to prolong breath. He chose forests, not courtyards. He left the bodies for days, not because he forgot, but because he remembered. Because memory, he believed, should rot where others could see it. The man they crowned was not a ruler. He was a mirror. Every traitor, every thief, every coward looked at his punishments and saw their reflection twisted, hanging, silent. There were kings who wanted obedience. Vlad wanted silence, and silence came, not from respect, not from love, but from the understanding that pain, when performed publicly, is more lasting than law. And he made it beautiful. There was no single moment when Vlad became a monster. It happened slowly, like rot behind the walls of a chapel unseen, spreading holy only in appearance. The first to vanish were his advisors, not all at once, one at a time. A cough here, a broken ankle there, and then a disappearance no one dared question. The court learned to speak in nods. Even whispers had weight. His brother tried to write to him once a letter full of pleas, inked with the trembling hand of a man who thought blood alone could preserve family. Vlad sent no reply, only a messenger bearing his brother's ring still wrapped around the finger. The nobles in Wallachia had mocked him once, mocked his foreign clothes, his Ottoman silence, his strange rituals. He invited them to dinner. Hundreds came, drunk on the perfume of their own status. They never left. The hall was boarded shut, torches flared, and by dawn, the stench of roasting flesh filled the valley. What began as vengeance transformed into doctrine. He did not kill indiscriminately. He chose, always with purpose, always with patience. He watched a thief's hands before taking them. He studied a liar's tongue before cutting it, and when he impaled, it was never sudden. The wood was carved smooth, the point rounded, not sharp enough to kill quickly. sharp enough to enter slowly through the rectum, rising inch by inch, guided by gravity, until it exited near the shoulder or the mouth. And he watched, not out of sadism, but clarity. To him, this was not cruelty, it was order, a message etched in flesh that decay alone could not erase. He ruled not from a throne, but from a field of bodies, and still they tested him. Merchants raised prices, soldiers questioned orders, priests preached mercy. He answered them with gardens of agony, symmetrical, deliberate, the stakes arranged like rows of crops. One ambassador refused to remove his hat before Vlad. He left with his hat nailed into his skull. Another dared to suggest a treaty. Vlad responded by sending him back to his king impaled, skewered like meat, ribs split like a fish. Word spread faster than ink. No map could capture the fear. Travelers rerouted entire caravans to avoid glimpses of the forests of stakes. The soil, once fertile, soured under the weight of blood. Nothing grew where the condemned had died, not because of curse, but because even nature seemed repulsed. Those who served him were not safe, either. He trusted no one. Even his closest were tested with traps, false commands, staged betrayals. Those who passed lived. Those who hesitated died. A servant once spilled wine. The next day, his body was displayed split from groin to sternum, hollowed like a gourd, filled with grain to feed the birds. But no birds came, not anymore. Even animals sensed the shift. Dogs grew silent. Horses refused to drink from certain streams. The air itself was thick, not with mist, but with the invisible weight of dread. Children stopped singing. Mothers taught their sons to bow to shadows. Vlad wrote letters not in diplomacy, but in warning. A noble in Transylvania received a pouch inside, the eyes of his spies. Another was sent a heart, still warm. It was said that Vlad carried no army, only examples. That when he wanted peace, he sent a tongue. When he wanted obedience, he sent a stake. His enemies tried to gather strength. They whispered alliances, planned uprisings, but their movements were slow, their messages intercepted. One by one, their heads appeared on spikes outside their homes, not from battle, but from betrayal. Always betrayal. Vlad didn't need wars, he needed silence. Silence fed his reign like coal feeds fire, and when voices rose, they were not met with argument, they were met with stakes. His people feared him, but more dangerously. They believed in him, they believed his terror kept order, that he alone could hold back the flood of Turkish conquest. The betrayal of noble greed, the chaos of the church. He had become not a man, but a myth, a wall of blood between the East and the West. Yet myths rot when they are lived too long. A single winter cracked his grip. Crops failed, roads flooded, supplies from allies grew thin, and as famine crept in, so did memory. People remembered warmth, they remembered voices, they remembered kings who did not mutilate, and cracks formed, quietly. A cart of bread stolen here, a village priest disappearing there. He sent more letters, more warnings. But fear had begun to lose its grip. You can only flinch so many times before you learn to brace. He raised the stakes higher, he impaled more, he dragged nobles from their homes and flayed them alive. But the silence that once meant obedience now felt like resistance. The air was still, but not reverent. It was waiting, waiting for a slip. And the slip came from within. His cousin whispered treason. His generals plotted a retreat. His own guards, once loyal, began to avert their eyes. And still he built fires. Still he sharpened the wood. Still he believed pain would purify. He burned entire towns accused of sheltering thieves. He lined the road to Targovishte with over 20,000 bodies impaled, rotting, some still breathing for days. He turned his country into a mausoleum. But death, like fire, can consume the one who wields it. The Sultan came with a larger force, with promises of mercy, with gifts of gold and water and survival. Vlad responded with corpses. He poisoned the wells, burned the fields, scorched the very earth. When the Ottoman army arrived, they found no battle, only silence and stakes, thousands, spaced precisely, some still moaning, some eyeless, some mere bones with lips stretched in dry screams. The Sultan wept, but he did not stop. He advanced. Vlad had won terror, but not war. His people, sick of rot, tired of fear, opened their gates. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it walks barefoot, carrying a torch, smiling like an old friend. Vlad fled. Not far, not fast. His power had made him slow. His legend had made him loud. He was captured, shackled, dragged. The man who made nations tremble now stank of sweat, piss, and dirt. The Impaler, impaled by his own silence. No trial, no reckoning, only whispers. His enemies didn't want justice. They wanted memory erased. His name was struck from scrolls, his deeds buried beneath thicker lies. But myths rot slowly, and Vlad had buried his story in too many bodies to ever fully disappear. You can burn parchment, you can silence priests, but you cannot dig up every bone. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind shifts east, people still swear they hear wood creaking, as if something tall, something sharp, still waits in the dark. They did not grant him a king's execution. There was no ceremony, no trial, no priest to offer absolution. Vlad's death began long before the blade. It began in the silence that followed his capture, when even his guards refused to speak his name. He was held in a damp stone cell, deeper than any dungeon, far from court, far from eyes. The air smelled of mildew, piss and mold, but he did not gag. He breathed it like incense. No chains were needed. He sat unmoving, legs crossed, spine straight, eyes open but not seeing. The man who once ruled with terror now watched shadows dance on the walls as if they were old friends come to whisper farewells. His captors waited for him to scream. He never did. What broke others' darkness? Cold. Hunger only sharpened him. In his final days, he said little. One guard claimed he heard him murmuring to the stones, not in Romanian or Turkish, but in a tongue no one understood, guttural, slow, like prayer and threat in equal measure. The executioners did not wear uniforms. They were chosen from the ranks of men who had lost families to his rule, but they did not rejoice. When they looked upon him, gaunt and still, their hatred collapsed under the weight of something older. Fear, not of what he was, but of what killing him might wake. They led him into a clearing at dusk. No crowd, no applause, just a ring of stakes driven into the soil like a forest of ghosts. Some old, some new, all stained at the center, not a gallows, not a sword, but a single sharpened pole, smoothed with oil. Vlad looked at it, not with panic, not even recognition, but with a gaze so steady it unsettled even the sky. Clouds shifted, birds vanished. The wind stopped. There are no clear accounts of what happened next, only fragments. A monk wrote that he knelt. A soldier claimed he stood. One said he spat. Another said he wept. But most agree he did not resist. He stripped himself. Not out of obedience, but out of control. He laid bare the body that had commanded empires, as if to say, "Look, even this bleeds." The executioners lifted him. It took several men, not because he struggled, but because none wanted to touch him alone. They lowered him onto the stake slowly, not out of mercy, but out of instruction. The point entered beneath him not sharp enough to pierce cleanly, just enough to part flesh. They did not drive it. They let his weight do the work. The stake moved inch by inch, guided by gravity and breath, splitting tissue, nudging organs, missing the heart but brushing against the lung. A surgeon could not have done it more carefully. He was impaled not to die, but to last. The pole exited beneath the clavicle. He did not scream. His hands clenched, his jaw locked. His eyes, they say, remained open for hours. As blood dripped down the shaft and pooled at the base, no words escaped him, only breath, ragged, wet, slower with each hour, but never silent. The stake swayed, the body trembled, night fell. No torch was lit. The men left him there, not because they wanted him to suffer, but because they couldn't bring themselves to end it. They feared that killing him would release something worse. By morning, he was still alive, barely. Eyes glassy, lips cracked, skin gray. Birds circled overhead, but none landed. Even the insects kept their distance. A priest arrived to read last rites. He didn't finish. Halfway through the ritual, he vomited and ran. They say Vlad moved his head, just slightly, toward the sun, as if even in death, he refused to bow to darkness. By the second day, the smell reached the nearby forest. A deer collapsed. A hound wailed. The sky remained cloudless, dry, unforgiving. On the third day, his mouth opened. No sound, just air, the shape of a curse or a blessing. No one could say. A child from a nearby village crept close, dared to look. She did not speak again for the rest of her life. On the fourth day, his body no longer bled. His skin split in places, the muscles beneath exposed like butchered meat, and yet the eyes open, empty, waiting. Some say he died on the fifth day. Others insist he lingered longer. No one stayed to confirm. His body remained upright for over a week. Rain fell once, briefly, and ran down the length of the pole, washing away blood, revealing veins like tree roots. Moss grew at the base. The stake cracked from the weight, but did not fall. They left him there, as a message, as a warning, but to whom no one dared ask. Travelers passed in silence. Horses reared without reason. The grass around the clearing turned yellow. Nothing grew again for decades. His corpse did not rot like others. It hardened, dried, became something between man and monument. When they finally removed him, they burned the stake first, but it would not light. They broke it, buried it in pieces. As for his remains, they were said to be buried, but no grave was marked, no stone, no relic. The church did not claim him. The crown did not speak of him. It was as if he had never lived. And yet in the years after, children whispered his name during storms. Mothers warned that if you lied, he would rise again, not as man, but as stake, as scream, as the silence after breath. Those who executed him could not sleep. One threw himself from a tower, another drowned in a barrel of wine. The last disappeared entirely. Some believe he was seen in Italy, mad and barefoot, carving faces into trees, and still the place where he died remains untouched. Travelers avoid it. Locals deny it exists, but the wind there never rests, and when it blows just right, you can still hear it, not a voice, not a cry, but the creak of wood, rising slow, steady, patient, like something not dead, just waiting. The stake was gone, the body vanished, but the land never healed. It rejected spring. Flowers refused to bloom near the clearing. The trees around it leaned away. Animals passed in wide arcs, even when his name was forbidden, even when maps redrew the borders and tongues changed the vowels. The memory remained not in books, but in the way people paused when crossing certain valleys, the way fire was kept burning a little longer at night, the way silence was offered to shadows. The Sultan, though victorious, returned to Constantinople without celebration. He did not speak of Vlad, not in public. His men whispered of what they saw, rows upon rows of impaled men lining the approach to Targoviste. Some so decayed they were more skeleton than flesh. Others so fresh the eyes still reflected torchlight. It was not a battle they had won. It was something else, something they did not understand, a sickness of the soul, perhaps, that lingered even in the wind. Soldiers who survived began to die suddenly, one by one. Heart failure, madness, suicide. One awoke screaming every night, carving stakes from his bedposts, then hanged himself on one. In Rome, the church sent envoys to ensure no relics remained. They burned what they found: letters, banners, weapons, bones, but even the ash felt wrong. Cold to the touch, dense, unscattering. One monk refused to destroy a scroll written in Vlad's hand. Within weeks, he went blind, claimed the ink moved on its own. In France, Vlad was a rumor, a nightmare noblewomen used to frighten their sons into obedience. In Hungary, he was a contradiction demon to some, hero to others, a man who had held the Turkish tide with cruelty unmatched. Even his enemies admitted that without him, the flood would have come sooner. And in Wallachia, his homeland, there was no funeral, no monument, no mourning. The fields where he impaled remained unplanted. His castle, half buried in mountain fog, became a place of ghosts. Travelers avoided it. Locals spoke of a coldness that never lifted. Even in summer, they said candles extinguished themselves there, that doors opened inward when no wind blew, and always the sound of wood bending in the distance, the sound of something old remembering how to rise. The nobles he slaughtered had descendants. Many fled, some returned, but none reclaimed the lands he touched. Vlad's silence outlived his reign. In the centuries that followed, poets avoided his name. Historians softened his story. They buried the stakes behind metaphors. They blamed disease, blamed famine, blamed war, but never him directly, as if naming him might summon him. The church, decades later, quietly reversed its stance. A document surfaced unsigned, suggesting that Vlad had once fought in defense of Christendom, that his cruelty had been a shield, that his darkness had kept darker forces at bay. A century after his death, a chapel near the Carpathians held a mass in his honor. The priest collapsed at the altar. Blood filled his mouth without wound. Witnesses fled. No mass has been held there since, but some returned to the legend. Writers, painters, the curious and the damned. They dressed his story in lace and candlelight, called him misunderstood, called him vampire, romanticized his thirst for control as a thirst for blood. But they missed the point. He never drank blood. He let it spill, slowly, deliberately, into the soil, not out of hunger, out of instruction. Impalement was never a feeding. It was a teaching, a scripture written in agony, a gospel of silence. Even now, the land carries his shape. Roads curl like ropes around where the bodies once swayed. Birds change direction mid-flight. Children dream of wooden poles and wake with splinters in their palms. There are records that speak of sightings of figure on horseback, cloaked in red, riding alone at dusk near the old borderlands. Always alone, always silent, never seen twice. And when people vanish in those regions, shepherds, travelers, vagrants, no search is made, no search ever finds. In the museums of Bucharest, a single tooth sits behind glass, claimed to be his, not verified. Yet visitors report nausea, chills, hallucinations. One woman collapsed, said she saw not the tooth but a field of stakes rising behind it. And no matter how many times his legend is rewritten as monster, martyr, king, or ghost, the earth holds the true version, the one without words, without morals, just the residue of control so absolute it outlived its author. Vlad's death did not end his reign. It deepened it, made it myth. And myths, once they root in blood, do not fade. They ferment. They sharpen. They wait. The people of Romania still light candles on certain nights without knowing why. They close windows not from fear of weather, but of watching. And some villages pass down a prayer that does not name God, only begs the ground to stay closed. "Do not open," they whisper. "Do not open, do not open," because what was buried was not a man, not even a curse, but a method, a ritual, a rhythm of obedience etched into the fabric of the nation. The kings who came after him ruled with swords, but the people remembered the stake, its silence, its slow speech, its command. And even now, centuries later, when someone disappears in the mountains, when a shepherd finds a trail of blood with no body, they do not blame wolves. They do not call for police. They lower their eyes. They whisper. He taught the wood to speak, and it still remembers. For what Vlad created was not just fear. It was a language, and in places where his feet once walked, it still speaks through wind, through rot, through silence that presses on the chest like hands unseen. What happened after his death was not forgetting. It was infection. And the deeper you dig, the more you find not history, but a design. One not built to end, one built to wait. They say his ashes were scattered, but the earth never received them. The soil refused, the wind carried them, but never let them fall. And somewhere, in the folds of that endless silence, something remained, not flesh, not bone, just presence. You can feel it if you stand in the wrong field at dusk when the trees no longer sway and even your breath forgets its rhythm. No birds, no voices, only a pressure, low and ancient, as if the ground beneath your feet remembers pain in full detail. Vlad did not disappear. He dissolved into ritual. He became a method of memory. Every impalement taught the land to obey. Every scream etched another commandment into stone. And centuries later, we call it myth, legend, horror. But horror isn't what you see. It's what waits unseen, unnamed, unburned. Vlad was never buried. He was translated from body to silence, from man to warning, and silence never dies. It only deepens. So when the wind shifts, when the crows vanish, when the ground feels too still beneath your feet, don't speak. Don't run. Don't look for a stake. Just listen. If it creaks, it's remembering. If it groans, it's beginning again. And if it's quiet, then it's already here.